The next one, so we have P for praise, R for reflect. So a reflection is all about sort of what you're saying, and it's a parroting skill. When a child says something to you, and you reflect back the essence of what they've said. You could be using different words, but the most important thing is that we haven't changed the meaning of what the child said to us. So it could be as basic as, I'm going to draw a dinosaur. And the adult says, you are going to draw a dinosaur. Or you're going to draw a dinosaur, right? Reflected back what the child has said, but we can also use it to correct language without sort of this critical element or without saying, no, 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 that's not how you say it. So her puts the shoes on her foot. We have some pronoun confusion there as well as the pluralization of feet. And so to reflect that back, you could say, she did put the shoes on her feet. So once again, we haven't changed the meaning of what the child has said. We have used different words and we have corrected that language. So why would we reflect? What are the benefits? This can feel quite weird at first, particularly for teachers, because what you all love to do is ask a lot of questions, which we're going to speak about in a second, and it's not a bad thing. And so we're thinking about this more as being a skill we use when we want to let the child take the lead of the situation, of the interaction, in the play, if that's what we're doing. So this is all about allowing the child to take the lead, right? This is when we would use reflections, which is exactly what the first benefit is. Um, this type of response to when a child is speaking to you allows you to give really rich attention to the child. It really shows that you're listening and that you care about what they're saying. Oh, you are going to bird dinosaur. She did put the shoes on her feet. Listening, I'm present, I care, right? Really rich. And that I approve. Obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious, but what we wouldn't do is reflect back speech, language, concepts that we're not super thrilled about hearing. So, for example, toilet talk. That's something that kids will often do. I'm going to make the horse put big poo. The horse is farting, la la la. Some families, some parents don't care about that. That's fine. They'll reflect it back. Other families care about it, and so they choose not to reflect back those sorts of verbalizations. So, and some of them are a bit more obvious. If a child drops a swear word, we're obviously not going to reflect that back, for example. And like with the example that I gave of the feets and the hers and the foots, it's a really nice way to improve vocab and to do teaching around vocab, but without the red flag of this is a lesson almost, which some of our classic PCIT kids, any sort of instruction or question or correction, it's the cue then for non-compliant or rejecting or you know disruptive behavior to come. It almost is like the first part of that cycle. They see that and they're like, okay, well, I know my role here. So this is a really nice way to do some of that correcting work without necessarily doing the red flag to the bull with some of our kids who are quite sensitive to that sort of thing. So we have the praise, we have reflect. We also have imitate, which is similar to reflection, but it's more about doing what they're doing as opposed to saying what they're saying. And uh, it could involve literally doing what they're doing, or as simple as joining in with their activity, or doing the same sort of things. So they're coloring in a sense, you're coloring in a sense, of whatever. So just basically doing what they're doing. And the benefits of this, once again, this is about lead following. And this is the situation, if we're seeing behaviors that are appropriate, like we just said, it's appropriate for us to follow a child's lead when we're in play or they're sort of unstructured time, they're doing their own thing. And it shows that we approve of what they're doing. A really cool part of imitation is that it allows us to model. Remember when we spoke about that vicarious learning, that kids often learn by observing what other people are doing? This is a really nice way of us to take advantage of that vicarious learning style and almost model appropriate social skills or play-based behaviors. So, for example, if you are both, coloring in a stencil and you use the brown texture to color in the trunk of the tree and you put that down and the child picks up the brown texter to use it, you can say something like, "Oh, we are doing such good turn taking today. I took a turn and then you took a turn. We're such good turn takers." And then what that does is almost sort of sets up a situation for when the child puts down their texter or offers you their texter, and they're like, let's take more turns. So you're almost given opportunities to show what being a good, member of a play situation can look like. So it's a really nice benefit of this sort of imitating what they're doing. It provides us with really nice opportunities, and this last point almost sort of covers that as well. That you can extend, you provides you an opportunity to extend behaviors. So, for example, oh, you've run out of paper. I'm going to share some of my paper with you, right? So it's again modeling that, extending the behavior, to get them to see what you're doing, which is something that they can do. And then we would obviously come in with a big label praise for that. Oh, you're doing such a good turn taking. Thank you for sharing with me, la la la. So what we'll do is scooch on over to D. So we have D for praise, R for reflect, I for imitate, and D for describe. Now, describe is probably the one that you would be least likely to do naturally or instinctually. And what it is basically giving a verbal blow by blow of exactly what is happening in the play and specifically what the child is doing. So when we describe a behavior, we want to make the child the star. So it's like, you're making a tower. You've collected all of the blue blocks together. Oh, you're stacking all of the blue blocks on top of one another. Oh, you've given it a red roof. So it's literally what the child is doing with their hands, and we're saying that aloud. And there's a couple of really nice benefits of this. Once again, a child has to do something before you describe it, which means that they're necessarily in the lead of what's happening. And the basic skill of pride is let the child take the lead in situations where it's safe for them to do so. And it shows that you're interested and you approve. Again, it's that really rich attention. It's like a child cannot help but assume that you are giving them all of your attention and that you're super interested in what they're doing if you're literally describing each step of their play process. Really cool sort of aspect of this is that what you're doing when you're sitting beside them, playing beside them, giving them sort of a verbal blow by blow of what you can see happening is you're keeping their attention on the activity, on their own behavior. And this can be a very powerful way of helping kids who struggle with structure, organization, and keeping on task and sustaining their attention. So I'm thinking kids who fall more into that sort of ADHD struggle sort of area, who get distracted really easily, struggle with their planning and organization, how to approach a task. Because what happens, the way that we do all of that sort of stuff is using our internal monologue of okay, so planning and organization, I'm going to do this, and then after that, I'll do this, and then so what I have to do is collect all of the blocks together first, and then sort them into colors, and then I make these separate chapters. So, like that's forethought, planning, structure, and organization, and lots of kids struggle with that. But what happens when you start using behavior descriptions is that you almost provide an external version of that internal monologue that they may lack or they may struggle with. And I've seen it happen in ECIT so many times that the children start describing their own behavior. And I've seen kids who cannot last more than 30 seconds on one activity go from that, 25 minutes, the whole session's worth of play on this one activity that then becomes very involved and very structured. So it's a pretty powerful tool. I think it's a secret weapon that I like to pull out, particularly for those kids who struggle to organize themselves. Another cool aspect is that it really can help you once again teach concepts and speech, but without the red flag to the bull. So even things like, oh, you've put that on top of, behind, underneath, beside, those sorts of orientation concepts. Oh, you've drawn an oval. You've drawn a pyramid. Oh, I can see you've made that into a cube. Different colors. Oh, you're using the aquamarine, whatever, like these new concepts, this new vocab. Kids aren't even aware that they're learning, but they sort of almost soak up. And they're like, I'm going to use the aquamarine texture. And it's this new thing that they haven't ever heard of before, and they didn't even know they were learning. But they've walked out of this play session with something new under their belt. So a really nice teaching tool that once again doesn't cost anything in terms of child rejection of the lesson or disengagement from the lesson, which happens a lot. And once again, this cool way of teaching social skills. And actually, I'm thinking of that goal of the waiting until somebody's finished before I speak. Because if we're thinking about a play situation, the adult isn't just sitting there in silence watching what's going down. They're speaking, they're describing, they might be reflecting. And so, you say, "Oh, you've collected all of the blocks together." And the child says, "Yep, I am building a tower." And you say, "Thanks for letting me talk about what you're doing." Like, you're almost modeling, and then you can potentially have an opportunity to praise if it feels organic and natural, the child sort of waiting for their turn in the conversation. You can almost start building up the foundations of that waiting until somebody's finished speaking to speak in this situation. And it's the opportunity to introduce the praise for the first time so the kid understands what that behavior involves, which then you can start using it in more real life situations, when they're clamoring to be the first one to speak. "Remember you were so good at X, Y, and Z when we were playing together. Let's try and do more of that," whatever. So, yeah, a really nice secret weapon of the tool, the old behavior description. So, a couple of tips. We want to try and keep our descriptions to the appropriate stuff. Again, I will in what happens when we see not so appropriate stuff. But yes, so we want to try and time it so that we're describing the appropriate behavior before the misbehavior happens. The child should be the star, not the toys. Often we find ourselves saying, "Oh, all of this Lego is so cool. Look, there's red Legos, there's blue Legos." But we don't really care about the Legos. We care about the kid and wanting to increase particular behaviors of that child. So the toys are almost irrelevant. It's what the child's doing with the toys that we sort of want to make the subject of the behavior description. And this sort of already covers what I said. We're not going to be describing inappropriate behavior. So toilet talk or aggressive play. "You're making him stab the Spider-Man, blah, blah, blah." Um, we'll get more into this, but I guess as a bit of a spoiler, you can pick and choose. Remember how I said at the beginning, so much of this is about your attention. And all of these skills we've spoken about today are all about ways that you give bits of attention. Are you giving your attention in praise for? Is it because you've directed a reflection towards it? And have you described what the child has done? All of these things are ways you give your attention. And you should be very intentional and selective about what can get your attention. So if you have a kid who's playing with a farm and it's making the horse, do big farts or whatever, that doesn't need your attention. We don't have to talk about that. We don't have to reflect it. We don't have to describe it. But is there anything the child's doing in the context of that that does warrant your attention? Is it, if they're walking the horse over, even if they're making fart sounds, which you don't need to give attention to, but they're walking the horse and that's really appropriate, it's neutral. We can describe that. "You're making the horse walk to the fence. You're making the horse trot." This is almost a really subtle but very powerful way of shaping those more like subtle disruptive behaviors. Obviously, we wouldn't do this if a child was throwing the horse around and breaking toys. We'll talk more about that later. But this is like those more subtle things that are just like to get a reaction or because they're being silly or whatever. We could just not give attention to that and try and find something else that does deserve attention. And what happens over time, particularly if you have a good relationship, is kids will start doing more of that stuff because that's the stuff that draws you in.